Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Buying a Home in Rotterdam webinar. It's 7:05 and we're ready to start. Can everybody hear me all right? Maybe not. Yes, if you can. Well, I can only see Ludo in this case, so maybe nodding is not the best solution. But we're going to start anyways. If you can't hear me, pop something in the chat and we'll find out what the solution is. Let's kick it off. Today, we'll be talking about several things. We'll be talking about renting versus buying, the buying process, the FAQ. We'll answer the most frequently asked questions, and then there'll be plenty of time to answer your questions. Please know that today's session will be recorded and shared. Maybe it's good to know as well, you can see my colleague Ludo in the screen as well. Ludo will be answering some of the questions behind the scenes already, and he'll manage the frequently asked questions and Q&A at the final stages. So if you have any questions, pop them in the Q&A. The Q&A is the section, you can see that most likely on the bottom of your screen when you hover with your mouse there, or if you have it on either side of the screen, but pop them in the Q&A. Don't pop them in the chat, please. Just pop the questions in the Q&A, and then we'll be able to actually answer them and make sure that we'll answer every single one of them. So my name is Kimo Paula. I am the founder of Expat Housing Network. I'm half Dutch, half Caribbean. I know what it's like to move to a new country and to find a new home. I'm a proud father of a daughter who is 4, but thinks she's 16 already. So who knows, maybe in 2 years she'll move out of the house, buy a place herself. And I bought my own home 5 years ago. But I can talk from experience. Back then, it was a competitive market already. It took me 7 offers before I got my offer accepted. Please note, I wasn't in this business back then, so I was as green as the majority of you are, but I've gone through the hoops and gone through the ropes, and I know what it's like to be in your shoes when it's a pretty competitive market. I learned a lot, and after several years, I decided to move into this business. But it's not just me, because greatness is achieved in the agency of others. One of them you can see here on the screen is Ludo. The other one is Katie. She's from Greece. As you can see, we have a very international setup. So we know what it's like to live in another country and move to the Netherlands. Alana from Ireland, Dominic from the UK, Philip from Belgium, and Giovanna from Brazil. These guys are one by one, and girls are one by one rock stars. So if you get support from any one of them, I think you're in great hands. A few other things worth mentioning. We are not traditional real estate agents at Expat Housing Network. Why am I telling you that? Because I think it's important. None of us come from a background in real estate. We all come from a background in the fine arts or psychology or name it, and we focus on making sure that the process is pleasant for you. We focus on securing the right home and making sure that there's no kind of like major challenges, hiccups, or alarms going off during the process, but more especially after the process as well. We only help with buying and renting. This is also something that a lot of real estate agents don't do, because they also sell and let properties. Why is this relevant? Because we focus on you guys. As you might have experienced or you might have heard, currently it's a bit of a seller's market. So if I am a real estate agent and I have a client where I can sell a property from and a client where I can buy a property for, which one do you reckon has my priority? Well, it's much easier to sell a property, so I'm more likely to, and even if it's unconscious or implicit or explicit, that they move towards the letting part or the selling part. We do not do that. We focus on finding homes for international. So we help you buy or we help you rent. Well, in this case, we hope to help you buy a property. One other thing is we charge a fixed fee. A lot of agents are still working with commissions based on the purchase price. Some charge 1%, some 1.5%, some 2%. I don't understand it. I don't know why you should pay us more if you're already paying more for a property. I don't think that's the right incentive, so we work with fixed fees. More about the fees later. And we know what it's like to sell in a new country. Ludo has lived abroad, I've lived abroad, name it. And we know what it's like to set up a new home, settle, and what it's like to be in a different market in that sense. So I think that's one of the key things as well for us. We can relate, we empathize, and we're familiar with your situation. Okay, some other things worth mentioning. First of all, I am not a financial advisor. Everything I say when it comes to financing is based on opinions and experiences. If you want to have a closer look, please ask a true financial specialist. I think this is really important, not just from a liability from our perspective, but also for you. I will touch base on who to actually contact, later in this presentation as well. But just so you know, or maybe find a mathematician specialist like Einstein. Maybe you can share a little bit more about the bigger works of these things. Before we go on with the rest of the presentation, I would love to get to know you guys though. So what we've done, and Luda's been a great help with that, we've set up a little questionnaire, a little poll for you. It's a few questions. What I'm going to do is I'm going to launch the poll, and I hope if you can all see it. I'll wait about 30 seconds. Please feel free to share your answers. It's not mandatory, so if you don't want to answer them, please don't. Hopefully you'll see the poll at the moment, pop in your answer, and then maybe we can actually tailor make this presentation a little bit more to you guys. So the first question is, where did you find out about this webinar? But also, how old are you? What does your household look like? And what made you decide to buy? We're seeing the answers come in. Perfect. 7 out of 49. Great, 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 great. By the way, I'm super stoked with the amount of people that are here. Cool. Thanks, 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 thanks. Okay, so as far as I'm seeing now, we're seeing that the majority of you found us through social media and are between 25 and 45. That is great. What does your household look like? Well, the majority is actually a couple, then second in line singles, and then families. By the way, maybe I can actually show this to you. Share results, boom, boom. You'll actually see them now as well. And what made you decide to buy? You would like to settle. That's great. That means that the Netherlands is the place for you, at least at this point. So we're really happy to hear that. The rents are too high. I completely understand that. And I would love to build up equity. All good reasons to buy a home. Perfect. Well, thanks a lot for sharing that. Later in this presentation, we'll ask a few more questions, but let's move on. Yes, because today's goal is to add value to you, and we believe in sharing information freely. Maybe good to know is that we can go into a lot of details in this presentation, but we decided to keep it relatively high level and give you the opportunity to ask the more specific questions in the Q&A. So bear with us, but the focus of today is to add value to you, and one person might be somewhere else in the process versus someone else and might have a completely different question. If we would want to answer all of this in the presentation, then it would be a presentation of, well, 4, 5, 6, 7 hours. We didn't want to do that. We wanted to focus on the most important things and give you a broad idea. But first, a few news flashes. First of all, the National Mortgage Guarantee. What is the National Mortgage Guarantee? The National Mortgage Guarantee is something that protects you. What? In what way? Well, let's say you buy a house of 325,000 euros, because that's what the threshold of the National Mortgage Guarantee is this year. The purchase price of 325,000 euros. Let's say you buy that property, that's great, you get a mortgage of 325,000, and then maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the line, something bad happens. Maybe you lose a leg, maybe you lose a partner, maybe something else happens, and you cannot pay your mortgage off anymore, and you have to sell the property. If there would have been like a little dip in the housing market, and you probably would not be worth 325 or higher, but would actually be worth 310,000 euros, and you would end up with kind of like a debt, then the National Mortgage Guarantee says, okay, we'll cover that debt. When was this installed, the National Mortgage Guarantee? After the financial crisis, because that's when a lot of the homeowners, well, first of all, they borrowed too much money. They borrowed more than 100% of the value of the property. And what did they do with it? They bought houses, boats, kitchens, name it. And then when the prices dropped a little bit, suddenly a lot of these properties were underwater, because technically, if they would sell them, they wouldn't recoup their money that they had out spending for a mortgage. So after that, we said, okay, hey, the Dutch government said we need to find a way to protect these people, but there should be a limit. And the limit is currently set on 325,000 euros. What is this limit? This is the purchase price. So it's not the amount that you borrow from the bank. It's not the amount of capital that you put up. It's not the value of the property. It's the purchase price. So if you buy a property for 310,000 euros, you're great. If you buy a property that's worth 340,000 euros, but the value is 310,000 euros, you're screwed, because 340 is above the National Mortgage Guarantee, pardon my French. So what we see, and we'll see this change again next year, is this will be corrected based on price indexing. So last year, the threshold was 310,000 euros. This year, it's 325K. Then, newsflash, transfer tax exemption. That is a new thing for this year, and it's pretty good for you guys, especially if you what are 35 years or younger. Sorry, if you are younger than 35 years. Sorry, if you're 35, you're too old. You're not really old, but honestly, you wouldn't be able to get this tax exemption. And if you're a first-time exemption user, so if you've used this exemption before, you can't benefit from it. If you haven't used it, you can't benefit from it. Doesn't matter where you come from, how many houses you own in the Netherlands. If this is the first time that you're using this exemption, that is great. Then, if you buy a property that is worth less or the purchase price is below 400,000 euros, you'll still be able to benefit from this tax exemption. Now, let's say you're a couple, which a lot of you are, and one of you is 35 years old and the other one is 32 years old. What does that mean? Well, the transfer tax exemption links to the transfer tax you would normally have to pay. Normally, you pay 2% transfer tax. If one of you is below 35 and you're buying a property below 400,000 euros, then instead of both of you being able to benefit from the tax exemption, only half of you, well, technically one of you, is being able to benefit from the exemption. So that means that you'll pay 1% instead of 2%. So please be mindful of that. Double check this also with your agent or with your financial advisor, and make sure that you buy below 400,000 euros, or you're younger than 35, and it's the first time you're using the exemption. Okay, so those were some of the news flashes. Now let's move on to renting versus buying, because I think a lot of you are renting currently, and what we want to do is we want to kind of like paint a little bit of the picture. Because when you're renting, and we picked this lovely Van Oldenbarneveldstraat in Rotterdam, it's actually from yesterday, so if you look at it, it's beautiful. If you want to rent, then please go for this one. But there's a few pros and cons. Well, the pros of renting is you have flexibility, because you can terminate your lease contract at some point and leave. It's not that much hassle to leave the property because you wouldn't have to sell it. There's no property or homeowner taxes. There are municipality taxes, but that goes both ways. And there's no down payments. Well, the only thing is a deposit, but you should get that back if you behave well. Then the maintenance, the major maintenance, is the landlord's responsibility. Then you of course have cons, and what are those? Well, technically you pay rent and you pay it to someone else. You're not benefiting from that in any way, so you're not building up any equity. There's also no benefits if the market goes up, right? Because that goes to the landlord. Then what do you do if you buy a home? This is around the corner from the previous property. It's a similar size. It's on for 345,000 euros. And what are the pros here? Well, the pros are that you have stability, right? Because you don't have an ending lease. The landlord cannot kick you out. So this is yours. You can stay as long as you pay your mortgage. Then you have the mortgage interest deduction. So in the Netherlands, we have a scheme called mortgage interest deduction. You can deduct the mortgage interest from your taxable income, and over that part, they'll charge you tax. So technically, you'll get some of the money back that you pay on a monthly basis in mortgage interest, which is a really nice thing. Also, you build up equity with your monthly installments, right? So every time you pay your mortgage, you build up a little bit of money. You save a little bit of money, you pay off a little bit of that property. Then, of course, there's also some cons to owning a property. You have property and homeowners taxes. Also, it's harder to move because you need to sell the property, especially if there's a little bit of a dip and you want to sell it, that becomes a little bit more tricky. If the market goes up, like we expect it to do for at least another year or two, then you'll be able to easily sell it. And then you have maintenance, which is your responsibility, right? So anything that breaks, damages, or gets broken in the house, because sometimes the things on the public areas or the outside are part of an owner association, if you're lucky to be part of it, but they're your responsibility. So please take that into account. Okay, so now if we compare these two, right? So for the renting property, you spend 1,295 euros per month. Then that is about 15,500 euros per year. That is money down the drain, unfortunately. Then if you buy, well, you buy for 345,000 euros. You have an interest rate of about 1.5%. Please note that there might be lower interest rates that you can actually benefit from. So have a look at that. And this is, again, have a chat with your mortgage advisor, because there's different products out there. Your monthly payment will be around $1,000 bucks. Then you have monthly interest, which is money that the bank earns. And technically that difference is money that you build up in equity every time. But you also have closing fees, because there's costs involved of actually buying a property. For example, the transfer tax if you're older than 35, or the notary, the agent. We'll come to that in a few. But what this means is that you have starter costs that are a little bit higher. But if we look at that on a time scale, then the red line is rent. So you'll pay rent, and this kind of like steadily increases. What we looked at is, okay, hey, if you have that closing fee, that's kind of like a start. So your cost will increase quite, or will be quite high in the beginning. But since you're kind of like earning a little money every time you pay it off, you'll technically start earning money compared to renting on month 7. You haven't broken even yet because you still need to pay off the rest of the closing fees, but you will down the line. So this is very interesting for you guys to look into. So if you're still interested in buying, this could be a good reason to do that. Okay. Now, did I skip something? No. What will you need in savings? We just talked about the closing fees, right? Let me close this part. We just talked about the closing fees, right? So when you buy a property, there are several things that you need to take into account. And the one, first of all, is that you need to have some savings because buying a property is not for free. Besides the purchase price, you'll need to pay for several costs. What are these costs? They are the purchase costs or the closing fees, the closing costs, purchase fees, name it. There are several things good to take into account. Transfer tax is the highest one. That's 2%. We just had a little chat about that. If you're below 35, if you're buying below 400,000 and it's the first time you're using the exemption, you will be exempt from this tax. So that's a great benefit for you guys. But you'll also pay for the notary. The notary sets up 2 documents, the mortgage deed and transfer deed. What I've done, by the way, is I've added a little column in the end that says tax deductible. What does that mean? You can deduct this again from your taxable income at the end of the year. Why did the government do that? Because I want to make sure you get the right advice, the right help when securing your mortgage. It's a tough cookie, it's a difficult product, so you want to make sure that you get professionals on board. So they want to kind of like motivate you to do that. Okay, so we have the notary fees, then we have a bank/mortgage broker. This ranges a little bit. Please note, if you go with a bank, it's not for free. If you go to a mortgage broker, it's also not for free. But since it's related to a mortgage, it will be tax deductible. Then you have a typical real estate agent. They charge 1 to 2% of the purchase price. It's not tax deductible. We put little in brackets there that we charge a fixed fee. We'll get to that in a few. And then you'll have an appraiser. They will actually take the value of the property. He is tax deductible because it's mandatory from the banks. The bank will not give you a mortgage if there's no appraisal report. Then there's a technical inspector. They'll inspect the property. Interpreter, mandatory when you sign the final documents. So they'll be there at the notary. And then there's a bank guarantee. And the NHG is not free either. You'll pay a first time, kind of like an entrance fee of that, which is 0.7% of the mortgage amount. And that is tax deductible. So that's what you need when you want to start or when you want to actually buy a property. Okay, now a second poll, because I'm very curious to hear from you guys where you are in the buying process. So again, a few questions. It will help us greatly, and just fill in if you want. I'll take a few seconds or 30 seconds for you guys to leave your thoughts. And it's also keep you awake, because if I'm boring enough, then this is a time to wake up a little bit. Thanks. The answers are coming in. So where in the buying process are you? So we have a lot of people who are kind of like researching in your rotation phase. That's great. Hey, there's some people that are viewing properties already. Great for you. No one's made an offer yet. Okay, cool. That's useful information. Then, did you guys chat to an agent yet? Yes, some of you did, but apparently it wasn't informative enough. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been here. I would have loved to know, though, what they did discuss. And then a lot of you said no. So that's great, because we can actually share a lot of the information that you need to know. Did you chat with a mortgage broker yet? Yeah, some of you said yes, and most of you have said no. Yeah, it's about time. Thanks a lot, guys, for filling in the poll. I'll share the results here so you know what they were like. Perfect. Okay, so a lot of you are really early in the process, so this information will be useful for you guys. I'm super happy to hear that. If, for example, you have any specific questions, again, pop them in the Q&A. Okay, let's continue. We're going to talk a little bit about the buying timeline, because what does that look like, right? If you, for example, want to start now, don't expect that you'll be able to get the keys next week of a property or in a month. The buying timeline looks like this. So this space, it's a little bit skewed, right? Because you start the search, and then once you view the place, you've submitted an offer, that can take weeks, depending on what's on the market. If your first offer gets rejected, then it might take a little bit longer. So take your time. Use kind of like a time frame of a minimum of 3 months and a maximum maybe of 9 months, depending, of course, on how fast you find something. So this area is a little bit skewed, but let's say you submit an offer tomorrow, Friday, it gets accepted on Friday the same day because it moves relatively quickly. Then you have some time to arrange certain things. This period where you arrange an appraiser and a technical inspector is called due diligence. Why is this due diligence? Because you do it before you commit to offering or buying the property. Why is that? Because you want to find out what the property value is and if there's any things that you should be aware of that need fixing or need repairs. So you do that before you sign the purchase contract. The purchase contract is the first document that commits you to buying a property. Well, it doesn't directly commit you because you have 3 days to kind of like reconsider. Let's say you wake up in the night sweating, you're like, what did I do? Then you can pull out without giving any reasons, right? Don't wait till the last day, like do that as soon as you feel proper doubt. But you'll have a few days, 3 days, business days to actually reconsider. Once that period is ended, then the mortgage guys will kick in. Well, technically what they'll do, they'll work before, they'll do the work before you actually sign the purchase contract. So don't wait until you've signed before you talk to them beforehand. They'll be able to prep a lot, so the transfer, the process of getting a mortgage is much quicker. But technically they'll submit the official application when the purchase contract and the appraisal report are in. It takes about 4 weeks. Sometimes they move much quicker. Depends on which party you go with. And then your mortgage application is approved. Hooray, well done, well done, well done. And then you have kind of like a little bit of a dead period, right? Because nothing happens. Maybe you visit the property, take your measurements, maybe discuss with the seller which curtains you want to keep, which sofa they need to take out. And about a week, 10 days before the transfer, you'll get a statement of completion from the notary, which is a final invoice, which actually states if you still owe some money, because technically we talked about the purchase price, and then on top of the purchase price, you have the closing fees. The bank will only give you 100% of the purchase price or 100% of the value. So anything above that, if you've overbid, plus the purchase fees or the closing fees, will have to be paid out of pocket. And then this big orange button is the handover. You'll get the keys there, you'll sign the transfer deed, and you'll sign the mortgage deed as well. So you become a proud owner of a home and a proud owner of a mortgage. And then you have, technically you are the owner of the property. You have about a month or two, we call it a reasonable time frame, to inform the seller of any shortcomings to the property that should have been mentioned. Don't wait too long. Don't wait until a month and a half or 2 months before sharing it. If you find out about something that was like this on their transfer before, that should have been disclosed, please inform the seller, because you can hold them liable. It becomes a matter where you, of course, have to prove that it was already the case like this, right? And make sure you don't wait too long. If you find out, it doesn't mean you have to bake a cake the first day you're in the property, but just make sure that you and don't wait too long with testing out everything. Then, who will you meet during the process? First of all, I would advise you to go to a mortgage advisor. Why? They'll be able to tell you what you can borrow. They'll also be able to tell you what that's going to mean for you on a monthly basis in terms of installments. They'll also be able to tell you what the interest rates are, if you can pay off the mortgage, and so on, so on. This is super important that you do this before you actually start the process, because you don't want to be looking at properties that you can't afford, right? So have a chat with a mortgage advisor. Also talk to your bank. Make them work for your money, because technically they need to convince you to go with them. I always compare a bank and a mortgage broker, or a mortgage broker and a bank, as follows. A bank is kind of like an old-fashioned retail shop. You go in there, they try to sell you their products, and then, well, this is what we have on store. They're not going to tell you, oh, please go to that store because they have something that looks much better on you than we have, right? So they'll try to sell you their products. A mortgage advisor is kind of like a it's kind of like a personal shopper. It's kind of like a stylist. They'll be like, oh, I know a few cool shops that really would fit you, because this is the perfect product for you, right? So you tell them what you want, and they'll be able to say, okay, this is the product, because they'll have a range of about 30 to 40 products they can choose from, because they have access to all the different banks. Please note that these guys do not get a commission from the bank. That is officially forbidden by law in the Netherlands. So they'll actually charge you a flat fee, and then they will do the work for you. Please note, it's tax deductible, so have a chat with both, right? Like, this is an important part because it's probably going to be the biggest, amount that you'll spend in a long time. So do your due diligence. Then you'll meet Hans, the notary. Hans creates a legally binding agreement between you and the seller and you and the bank. He'll come into play once the purchase contract is signed, because the purchase contract, and that's why I highlighted in red, will be drafted up by the selling agent. Double, triple, quadruple check that, because selling agents are not notaries. Notaries have a legal profession. Selling agents have a selling profession. So you want to make sure that that contract is proper. Then they'll draft up the mortgage deed and the deed of transfer. The mortgage deed is the agreement between you and the bank. It's the officialization of that agreement, because you will most likely sign a small offer before that with the mortgage advisor or the bank. And then the deed of transfer makes you the owner, because it transfers the title of ownership from the seller to you. So this is what the notary does, and yeah, they're kind of like the legal independent party in that sense. Then you have Michelle, she's the appraiser. When does she come into play? She comes into play once your offer is accepted. Maybe I can quickly go back here. So your offer is accepted, right? This is where Michelle comes into play. You don't get a valuation on the property from a valuator before you submit an offer, because if you don't get your offer accepted, that's lost money. So you get that person in directly after your offer is accepted, like within a week or something like that. You want to get the value of the property because you need that for your mortgage. Okay, what she will do, she'll come to the property, she'll take a few photos, she'll ask a few questions, but the majority of her work is done in the office. What she'll do is she'll look at properties, relevant, similar properties that have been sold in the last 6 to 12 months, and then she'll do her calculations. Based on that, she'll come with a report, and that report has to be filed to an independent institute. We call it the NWWI. That sounds very ghetto when you say it like that. The NWWI. They are an independent institute that double checks if Michelle played by the rules. Why are they here? Because banks don't want to accept any other validated reports. Again, this is some residue from the 2008 crisis. At some point, the valuation skyrocketed. So we said, okay, hey, there is a specific and strict procedure that they have to follow. So they'll do that. And that's why it takes a few days. So don't wait too long to get your appraiser in. Do that rather sooner than later once the offer is accepted. The same thing for Millie. Maybe they can go together, right? She will come into the property and take photos. She'll bring some tools. She will inspect the property. Millie has a builder's background. She's a contractor. She knows what it's like to look at a property and say, okay, hey, this is not looking good, or that needs a repair, or that needs work, or there's humidity. So please have somebody inspect the property. Of course, if it's a new build, you might not want to do that. If it's a property that's 10, 20 years old, then please do that. If it's a property that's 60 to 100 years old, you especially want to do that. So get Millie in before you sign the purchase contract and after you have the offer accepted. Okay, her report will be done in about a day or two, so you don't have to wait too long for that. Then we have Alana, your buying consultant. She will inform you and assist you during the full purchase process. What will she do? She'll do several things. She'll schedule the viewings, join you to them. She'll do the property research, price research, and negotiate on your behalf. She'll schedule the third parties, and she'll review all the legal documents with you. Alana works for us. She's a great gal, and yeah, you know she will be helpful. Then that was technically the conclusion of the presentation, but there's always several questions that are being asked us during every presentation. So that's why we said, okay, hey, we can kind of like visualize them in a presentation, or we can just answer them for you. Ludo will do the honors. By the way, this is your time also to add your questions in the Q&A, because once we've gone through this setup, the frequently asked questions, then we'll answer all your questions. So please pop them in. Ludo, take it away.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Kimo. Always my favorite part, the Q&A. First question, of course, for you. What happens if you want to leave the country after several years?
Good question. Good question. A lot of you moved here and don't know what the future will hold for them, right? Maybe you'll stay here for a longer period. There's so many stories that I've heard of people that said, no, just stick around for a few years, and they've been here for 10, 12, 15 years. But who knows, maybe your job requires you to move somewhere else. Maybe you will want to move somewhere else, right? So what can you do if you leave the country after several years? Well, first of all, you can keep your home, but you'll have the mortgage cost. It's not forbidden to have a home in the Netherlands and live somewhere else, right? But it's costly. The second option is you can rent out your home. You need permission from the bank, though. We'll go into a little bit more detail in a few. The third option is you can sell your home, please note there's no penalty of paying off your mortgage when you sell your property. And there's also no capital gains tax. So if the price have gone up and you earn a little bit money on it, that's great because you don't have to pay taxes on that.
All right, cool. Then the next question is going to be, how much can I borrow from the bank?
That's a good question as well, because a lot of you will think, okay, hey, if I can get the mortgage that's linked to my loan or to my salary, 400,000 euros, and I buy a property that is 300,000 euros and it's actually worth 300,000 euros, I will be able to get 400,000 euros. That's not the case, because the bank will look at two things. They'll first look at the value of the property. That will prevail over anything else, right? Because if the value of the property is set at, let's say you buy a property for 300,000 euros, the value of the property is 300,000 euros, you'll be able to get a mortgage of 300,000 euros, not more. Nevertheless, never mind your salary. If you earn more, you don't get more. If you, however, earn less, then the salary thing kicks in. So if you don't earn enough money to borrow 300,000 euros, then there's a cap based on your salary. So that's why it's super important to have a chat with your mortgage advisor or your bank. A rough calculation, multiply your gross annual salary by 5 times, and then you can add your partner's annual salary for 90%. So that's something that you can already do, like a rough calculation, but this also differs a little bit per mortgage provider, right? So this is what you can borrow from a salary cap, but then once you have that, the value cap comes into play with the mortgage. So that's why you always have to get an appraisal report from for the property that you want to purchase, because the bank will say, okay, hey, this is the maximum that you're going to get for us. Again, this is something that is a residue from 2008, because back then people were able to borrow 104, 105, 110% of the value of the property. But that didn't make sense, right? Why would they be able to borrow so much money? It was just a risk because they weren't really behaving as adults. They were spending the money on things that didn't have any value. So that's why they said, we're going to lower that amount, and now the banks can only borrow 100%, or you can lend only 100% of the value of the property. I hope that answers the question.
I think it does. Cool. All right. So would I be able to rent out my property or a room in my property?
Yeah, that is a possibility. But please note that until you've paid off your mortgage, the bank still has these agreements in play between you because you have an outstanding mortgage. What does that mean? The bank needs to give you permission to rent out your property. Why is that? Because if you rent out your property, and especially in the Netherlands, tenants are very well protected. So it's not always very easy to get a tenant out. And I believe that's a good thing, right? It's people's lives, so you don't want to get rid of them easily. So Dutch law protects them. That also means that the banks will consider your property a property that's rented out. Well, since a property is rented out, and they consider the value of the property lower because, hey, people that are living in a property that's not theirs are maintaining the property in a different way. Landlords who are renting out their property are not considered to be the best kind of like maintenance guys, so the value decreases. But also, the amount of people that can actually buy that property, because there's a tenant in it, will be lower because only investors will buy it. So the value of the property will decrease. So the bank will only give you permission if you ask them. If you rent it out without, there's a risk involved, of course. I do know that a lot of people try and do it, but I would advise you to consider that very carefully. The bank sometimes give you permission when you want to leave the country for a year, but then the bank will say, okay, hey, you have to have certain specific clauses in your contract that will allow you to move back into the home after a year. But still, you'd have to ask permission. If you want to do it for long term, then the bank will say, no, we're not going to do that. If you want to do that, you have to get a buy-to-let mortgage. That is a mortgage that is specifically for investment properties. The interest rates are a little bit higher. You have to make a down payment of about 25 to 30%. But please bear in mind that this is not always the case with your bank. You can't always take a buy-to-let mortgage out with your bank. Then that's as far as renting the whole property out goes. Renting out a room, yes, that's a little bit more accessible because you can rent out a room, but you'd still have to have specific clauses in the contract. And please know that the bank will only allow this if you add a clause in that contract that states that the seller, that the room, the person that's renting the room, will actually leave the property when it's sold. So please bear in mind that that's more of a realistic option, but you still have to involve your bank with that.
All right. Then moving on to the next question, it's going to be, what's the typical amount I should normally overbid, if I
Yeah.
should at all?
Yeah, that's very good. And I think, Ludo, you're also experiencing that. You get a lot of those questions, like how much should I overbid? I've heard it's 10% in the market, 15, 20. Our answer is there's no percentage. There's no set amount that you should overbid. Why not? Is because, and I think the next time we should add a visual here, because what a lot of people do is they look at the asking price. But what the asking price is that you see on Funda is the price that the agents come up with, right? Or the selling parties come up with. They can be very opportunistic and say, you know what, let's put the price up that's really close to the value. Or they can be a little bit more pessimistic, or they want to try to impress the sellers, the selling agent, by putting it for much lower, getting a lot of people in and getting offers that are much higher. So don't look at the asking price. Look at the market value of the property. How can you define a market value? We'll get into that in a few. But if you just stare blindly on the asking price, then some agents are very kind of like secure and they don't want to cause too much of a fuss, so they'll keep it a little bit close to the maximum, to the value of the property. Some agents are not, and then you can't really compare what's being overbid, because let me give an example. So a property is worth 300,000 euros. So if you would send an appraiser there, he would say, or she would say, this property's value is 300,000 euros. Agent one will put it up for 390,000 euros because he thinks that, well, that's a decent amount. Maybe I'll get 310,000 euros if I'm lucky. I'll put it up for that. The other agent thinks, okay, I'm going to put it up for 360 because, or sorry, was it
300, you said.
300. 300. So for 260. So the other one was 290, right? The other one is 260. 260 because I want to impress the seller, right? I want to show that I can get a lot of people in, and I want to show them that, hey, I'm getting offers for 300 or 305,000 euros. And look at that difference. Look how much people overbid over the asking price. But in the end, agent one got a little bit more money because he ended up with 310,000 euros, put up for 290, where agent two got maybe a higher price over the asking price, but not that much over the actual value. So what we always look at is the market value. And therefore, if you say 10%, 10% is always based on the asking price, or 15% is based on the asking price. We always read this. Actually, there was an article in the newspaper today that says, oh, the market is this because I had to pay 80,000 euros or 20 or 30,000 euros over the asking price. And then my alarm bells go off, because I think, like, don't look at the asking price. The asking price just tells you what kind of agent you're dealing with. It doesn't tell you anything about the value of the property. So please don't stare yourself blind on what the market says about, oh, you should offer this over, offer that over. Even when you look at the big data, that's not what you want to be talking about or listening to.
All right. Well, a very important question as well, of course. Can you tell us a little bit about our fees, Kimo?
Yeah, I can. So we have two different packages. We have a smart package. That's for people who are a little more confident, independent. And what we offer there is kind of like a virtual assistant. So we do an intake with you. We have, in this case, for example, Ludo or Katie, they'll be your personal buying managers. What they'll do is they'll do property research. They'll do offer submissions, and most importantly, they'll do price research as well. So they'll look at the market value of that property. And then they'll review all the contracts, they'll book in third parties and make sure they answer any question that you have. This is something that we can do from a distance, so we don't have to be there. So this is not the package where we hold your hand and join you in all the viewings. Like we mentioned, we charge a set fee. So for the smart package, we charge, I put 1999 in there, but it's 2,000 euros. 2,000 euros, and that's that. Doesn't matter how much you're buying a property for. If you buy a property for €1,000,000, we still charge 2,000 euros. If you buy a property for 200,000 euros, we still charge 2,000 euros. That's the set fee. And then we have the complete package. Complete package is where we kind of like hold your hand. We schedule the viewings, we attend the viewings, we attend the third parties, and so on and so on. Please note that we help you secure the right property, right? I think that's very important to say, because on Funda, you'll find the properties that are on the market. We get a lot of questions about, like, hey, but I heard that agents share properties off the market, and every property is bound to come on Funda, right? So make sure that you set up like a little newsletter that you can just send properties to you on a daily basis.
Cool. All right, the next question is going to be, what is the 10% deposit that I need to complete?
Yeah, so maybe I can go back to the, oh man, maybe I had it there actually. Sorry, give me a sec. No, so I'll skip back to the timeline, because the timeline will tell you a little bit more about this 10% deposit. Okay, so both of the parties that enter into an agreement will want to have a certain level of security, right? So let's say you buy a property. For you, it's relatively easy to find the seller in case he pulls out and pulls something, right? You know where he lives. So for the seller, it's a little bit different, because the seller, let's say you enter into an agreement and you just fly off into the horizontal horizon and never come back. Then the seller will have a problem, because maybe he bought a new property and suddenly he has 2 mortgages he has to pay. So the seller will want to have a level of security, and this is translated into a deposit, a 10% deposit. The 10% refers to the purchase price. That deposit will be in effect somewhere around when your mortgage is approved, right? So they'll request that amount maybe a day or a week after your mortgage is approved, or if you have the cash, you can use it to make your offer a little more attractive. So it can happen a little bit faster. Why is that? Because if either of you breaks the agreement when you're technically not allowed to, then the counterparty can hold you accountable for 10% of the purchase price. So in this case, the seller will require that. You can pay the 10% actually with cash, or you can ask your mortgage provider, could you please give a bank guarantee? And then the bank or the mortgage provider will guarantee that amount. Sometimes it costs you a little bit of money. Sometimes it's part of the mortgage service that they offer. So it'll be for free. So that's the 10% deposit.
Alrighty. Well, I think a question that a lot of us have been wondering about, or have been questioning ourselves. What impact does COVID-19 have on the housing market?
Yeah, that's something that we're still feeling today. If you would have asked me this a little bit over a year ago, then I would have been like, no, sorry, we're going to see a dip. It's not going to work. All hell will break loose. No. I did actually, full disclosure, record a little video that expects a dip somewhere, but I was not taking into account the government subsidies and all the government support functions that were in place for so long. So what we've seen actually is something different. We've seen that because we had to lock down in our houses became more important than ever. So where a dip was anticipated, people suddenly started focusing more on homes, right? So people, instead of staying lovely in their rental property, we're currently like, hey, I have a 1-bedroom home. I'm with my partner. We're both working from home. That sofa is nice, but it's kind of like wearing off. Plus, I'm getting sick of looking out of that window or looking at my partner all day because I want to have a special place. So what they'll do is they'll not look for another place to rent, because suddenly they could be spending much more time at home. They want to have a place they can invest in and then call themselves home, or call it a home for themselves. So we saw a lot of people flock towards the housing market after kind of like the first shock disappeared. And we're still seeing that. What a side effect was that people wanted more space. So initially we saw kind of like an exodus out of the city, but because there were a lot of people who were still wanting to buy in the city but found it more difficult, they suddenly had the chance to buy in the city. And now what we're seeing, especially now that some of the things are relieved and that the vaccination programs are kicking in, we're seeing that the cities are becoming more attractive again. So what happened? People became more aware of their homes, so they started buying homes. We saw a exodus out of the city. Now it's kind of like with the tides, it's coming back in a little bit again. And the other thing is that we saw people start suddenly saving money because they couldn't spend it on anything. So they were actually buying properties, and that drove the price up a little bit. They were buying properties and they were actually suddenly able to overbid by a little bit more, and that made the market somewhat competitive. So those are 3 of the impacts that we're seeing. What will happen in the future? I don't have a glass ball. If I would have had a glass ball, I would probably sit here, well, with my vest on, but with a Hawaii short on as well, with some Hawaii hula hoops in the background. But I unfortunately don't. I would still share that information with you, but at this point, I foresee that at least this year and next year, we'll see an increase. And please look at the different housing markets, right? Because the Netherlands, we're not building houses fast enough. So we're seeing still a shortage in supply. The demand, however, is quite high because there's plenty of people that will want to buy. And especially when the borders open up, we'll see more people and internationals flock towards the Netherlands. So I don't foresee any changes, but economical downturns can happen and can happen all of a sudden. And that's a bit tricky. I do believe, though, that if you look at where we are now compared to where we were in 2008 or the end of 2007, we are in a more healthy space when it comes to the housing market. Back then, people had larger debts and the value of the house was not reflected carefully in the mortgage amount. Now people have mortgages of up to 100% of the value of the property, and everyone has bought a house in the last couple of years will have paid off their property. I think the same thing applies for if you buy a house today, then before you get any economical downturns, you will have paid off some of the property. So technically, we won't see a big dip if we will see a big dip. But hey, again, I'm not a financial advisor. I don't have a glass ball. Who knows what will happen? But I do know that combination of low interest rates as well, housing market shortage, and an increasing demand, we'll see prices go up. Maybe not as much as last year, but we'll still see a steady increase, I believe. Okay, so that's my thoughts on how COVID will impact the housing market.
All right. Well, then I think a very valuable question this one is, does working with EHN add value?
I think it does. What do you think, Ludo?
I think so too, especially if you work with us, of course. No, definitely.
So there's several things, right? One is that if you work with us or with an agent, then selling agents take your offers more seriously. Why? Because you've done your due diligence, and we're not going to submit strange or crazy offers. They still experience a lot of people who are just offering, especially if they're desperate, they're just offering whatever, and then not backing up their offers with due diligence and with careful consideration, and then they'll pull out. We have had it happen like several times where selling agents called us after an offer was pulled by someone else, and they're like, "Hey, this property is still available. Would you be interested?" Then we can sometimes book viewings when it's no longer possible, right? Sometimes it's super attractive a property. You share the property with us, and by the time we give them a call, they're like, "Oh, sorry, we're fully booked." Well, sometimes they're like, you're an agent? Great. We have a small time slot because we keep a few available for realtors. Then we also support by reviewing Dutch and legal documents. So whether it's the bridge contract, transfer deed, or any documents related to the property, we will review them. And probably one of the most important things, we help define market value through market data. There are several sources out there that you can use. The land registry / cadastre is one of them. But it's always a bit of a puzzle. And how do you apply the right calculation, the right approach, right? That's what we help with. We will give you a range of what the market valuation be most likely be at. Because if you send 3 appraisals to the same property, they'll most likely come back with 3 different appraisals. They'll be close, they'll be a range. Maybe there's like a margin of error of about 5%. And that's what we try to do as well. We try to give you that range because that's going to be super important for you to buy a property because it's going to be linked to what you can borrow from the bank. And we will inform you about the rules and the regulations. Always good to know what you can expect and just make the process a little bit more seamless. And besides that, we make sure you don't make the same mistakes I made specifically. I made a lot of mistakes when I entered the housing market as a buyer, and looking back at it, I started off with an agent, and then I thought agent's not getting me the properties. And now looking back at what I did myself, I'm like, oof, that went well. You were lucky. But I made plenty of mistakes, and there's definitely things that I've learned since, and we will help you prevent you from making those same mistakes. Now, okay, so those were the frequently asked questions. We would love to learn about what you thought of this webinar. So we have one more small poll, and then we'll actually go over to answering your questions. So please leave your thoughts about the experience, about what we've presented so far, and then we'll go over the actual Q&A. So how likely would you be to refer this webinar to a friend or a colleague? And did you miss anything specific in this webinar? Maybe we'll touch base on it with your specific questions. And what would you like to get more information on? Cool. If my parents saw these scores, they would be super happy.
That's what we do it for, right?
Yeah. I get like a report at the end. Send it to
Exactly.
you done your homework? Cool. Okay, so we get a pretty decent score. So I would say on average, maybe 8.5, maybe a 9. And anyone that scored us below a 7, we would love to learn from you. So just leave a comment in the chat. Okay, is there anything that we could have improved on? Did you miss anything in this presentation? A few people missed several things. Hopefully we'll be able to answer those during the Q&A. And if not, you're always free to book an intake. It's a free intake. Don't worry about it. Like, there's no strings attached. You get to talk to us one-on-one. And what would you like to get more information on? That is the actual buying process, taxes, and what is a winning bid? Yeah, that's a good question. We can definitely, maybe we should do like a weekly presentation on that, on how you can actually set up a winning bid, because we get that question so often. Cool, perfect. Then I think, Ludo, take it away. The Q&A is all yours. Before we go though, schedule a free intake with us. Again, you can do this via the website, or we'll share this presentation. We'll follow up with some emails as well. There'll be some relevant information in there. We're going to share with you a handbook of how to buy a home in Rotterdam with all the information in it, maybe some extra information as well with some third-party vendors and so on. Again, we believe in sharing information with you freely. We can do that via the intake, the guide, name it, the website. But we'll first start off with the Q&A. First of all, thank you.
Cool. All right. Well, we asked you a lot of questions, so I think it's time to answer your questions. Most important part, of course. I'm just going to start on the top and go the way down. Please excuse my pronunciation of all the names. We have people here from all over the world. First question is from Moataz. If I have the 30% ruling, how do I benefit from it in the buying process? So the 30% ruling, unfortunately, doesn't help you a lot with your mortgage. In the buying process, not so ever. Please have a chat with your financial advisor, because again, they have a range of different mortgage providers, and we're seeing that some mortgage providers are taking it into account, but the majority are not yet. So have a chat with your mortgage advisor. This is where the bank falls short a little bit, because if you just talk to the bank that doesn't take it into account, then they'll not help you with it. I know that there's maybe 1 or 2 mortgage providers that do take it into account, but very limited. Yep. Okay, cool. All right. Then the next question is from Zita. She asks, do you pay Robin, the mortgage advisor, in advance, or actually when you've bought the property and you've had your
No, good question. Good question. So the mortgage advisor is a no cure, no pay advisor. So if you don't buy the property, you don't pay them. All right, that's a good deal. Then a question from Matteo. He asks, is a makelaar actually a buying consultant? So this is a good one. We consider ourselves buying consultants, and we don't consider ourselves makelaars. Why not? Because we're not selling agents. So we don't sell properties or let properties, and therefore our focus is on helping you buy a property and will not be distracted by another client who wants to sell. But technically, yeah, you can consider them as similar, because they do offer, or they can offer, a similar service. Whereas again, the makelaar will most likely also have clients in his database where they sell properties for. Okay, all right. Then the next question is from Masoud. He asks, what are the key parameters to check when actually visiting or viewing a property? That's a good question. So first of all, you want to check what the condition of the property is. Sorry, there's several things that I always look out for. I always go to the bathroom, because that is probably one of the most vulnerable places in the property. Why? Because humidity can cause and wreak a lot of havoc. That's one of the things I look for. I look for, are there damp spots in the bathroom? Like, is there plenty of ventilation? Are the taps leaking? So on. Then the second thing I look out for, and it depends a little bit if you're looking for an apartment or if you're looking for a proper house. If it's an apartment and it has kind of like a public space, have a look at that as well, because it will give you an idea of how well it's been maintained by the association of owners. If it's a private home, then have a look at the facade on the back as well. Have a look at the paintwork. Is it well done? Because that might be necessary to do in short notice. But also, and this goes for all properties, have a look at the boiler. The boiler is sometimes 10, 15, 20 years old. If it's more than 15 years old, then, and that's 1.5, by the way, then you might need to replace it on short notice. Also have a look at when it was last maintained. Ask questions. And yeah, those are the things I would look out for when you visit a property. There's plenty more, but yeah.
Exactly, cool. All right. Then the next question is from Nardo. Can you give us an indication of the size of mortgage we can get given a specific income? I think you tapped on it already a little bit, but maybe you can repeat the answer.
Yeah, good one. So and like gross calculation is multiply your gross salary, annual gross salary, times 5. Don't take into account any bonuses, but you can take into account your holiday pay. So let's say you earn 4,000 euros a month, then you can multiply that by 12.96, right? So that's the annual gross salary that you make. And based on that, you can calculate your mortgage if you multiply that by 5. If you have a partner, last year, the amount of the salary of your partner that could weigh into the mortgage was, I think, about 75%. They've actually increased that to 90%. So you can do the math there. That's a rough calculation. It might differ per provider. And that's why you want to have somebody who can actually support you with that.
Okay. All right. Cool. Then the next question is from Lynn. Lynn is interested in buying a house with her friend to have a higher mortgage. Would it be possible to buy a house with a friend if we have a mutual agreement between us?
Yeah, you can buy a house with a friend, but I think the mutual agreement should be states very clearly what happens. And of course, I don't hope this happens. But if you break up, or if you something happens to one of you, what happens to the other person's share? So that's very important to clarify, because it would by law go to kind of like the first in line in the family, or if there's children in place, so on. So please double check what you want to do with that. But it's possible to buy a house with a friend, but there are certain things you need to have in writing and clarify.
All right. Then we have another question from Masoud. He asks, is there a way to compare neighborhoods in terms of crime, cleanliness, anything like that?
So those are a few criteria that you want to double check. I know that there's websites that allow you to compare neighborhoods when it comes to demographics and stuff like that. Maybe send us an email. Send my email to buying@ehn.works, and we'll share with you some of these links. It depends. Did I hear the tiger in the background?
Yeah, you heard it.
It depends a little bit on how detailed you want the information to be, but there's definitely some websites that allow you to get a little bit more information. Please note though that information is always a little bit old, so most likely from 2019 and before, or even before that, and things might have changed, but there's definitely something you want to have a look into. Yeah.
Okay. Then we're moving on to the question from Hamza. Here she says, if we find something that is not up to standard or needs fixing and it's broken after you've made the offer and it was accepted, but before the contract is signed, what is the procedure? Do you negotiate with the seller to fix it or bring the price down?
Good question. So technically the seller is responsible for the property up until you've signed the transfer deed. So that is on the date of transfer where you become the owner. If anything breaks between you submitting the offer, it getting accepted, and you becoming the owner, then the seller has the responsibility to fix it. If it's a big thing and the seller can't fix it, then you technically have grounds to either dissolve the contract or to renegotiate. So you do have rights there. And the seller it's mandatory for him to inform you about this as well. Because if you find out on the day of the transfer, then you can still hold them liable, even a couple of days and weeks after.
Okay. Then we have a question from an anonymous attendee. He or she asks, what is better, simple or compound interest rates?
What is better, simple? And I think you're referring to annuity or linear. So I think that it depends a little bit, because I would consider, especially with the current interest deduction scheme, I would consider annuity to be a little bit more interesting. than linear. Why? Because you'll benefit from the interest rates in the beginning, and as you pay more of the property off, your interest rates will be lower over time anyways, and therefore you wouldn't need to, you wouldn't benefit much. I foresee that in the future, they're probably going to kind of like slowly wind down the interest deduction scheme. But again, it depends a little bit on what you want, right? Because if you go for linear, you pay off more of the property from the start. And if that's the goal, if the goal is to build up equity as soon as possible in that sense, then that could work.
Okay, interesting. Then a question from Matteo again. Is using a mortgage broker always better than talking directly with several banks? What are the benefits?
I would do both. If you have the time, do it, right? Because technically, sometimes, especially if you're, for example, a client with a bank, they'll be able to give you a good rate. If you feel comfortable somewhere, and that's also the most important thing, you feel comfortable with the advice that you're given. So have a chat with at least 1 or 2 banks and at least 1 or 2 mortgage advisors. That'll give you a good idea, and based on that, you can like do your math and say, okay, I'm going to go for this person or that provider. Yeah.
Okay. Then we have another question from Matteo. Why do we actually do valuation of the house after we sign the purchase contract? Shouldn't we do a valuation and then offer?
No, so that's a good question. So the valuation is necessary for you to get that mortgage, right? The bank will only give you 100% of what the valuation ends up to be. And if you do it before you submit an offer, then you don't get your offer accepted, and the valuation costs $500 or $600. So you've lost that money. So you don't want to do it before you submit the offer. You want to do it once you submitted the offer. You don't want to do it after you sign the purchase contract, because if the value comes out to be much lower and you need 100% of that money to actually finance the property, then you end up with, well, something you have to, an amount that you have to put up in cash. So do it between your offer getting accepted and you signing the purchase contract. That's the time where you want to do the appraisal report.
Exactly. And we as buying consultants, of course, do a price research beforehand to see what the actual value of the property is to make the right offer.
That is super valuable.
Yeah.
Thanks, Lou. Yeah, for sure.
Cool. So then we're moving on to the anonymous attendee. Can I use my savings from my home country? And if so, are there any conditions?
You can definitely use your savings. Yeah. If you can transfer the money into a Dutch account, you can use the savings. Please note, though, that several parties will ask you where your money comes from, especially if you pay out of pocket above an amount of 10,000, then they'll ask you where the money comes from, and you might have to prove that. So that's to protect from money laundering and fraud and stuff. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Then another question from that person. Would you recommend finding an independent mortgage advisor, or one from a personal bank is also fine?
So that's a question we've answered before. Again, I compare a bank to a retail shop. You go in there, they'll try to sell you their products, and maybe they'll have 3 or 4 products on. So it's a very, very small retail shop. And then a mortgage advisor, they have a range of 20, 30, 40 products. So they'll be able to give you a more catered advice. That's why they also cost a little bit more, because the bank will, of course, earn money on you and when you pay off the mortgage. But I believe that especially with the amounts that we're currently spending on properties, 1 decimal difference can make a world of difference. So do your due diligence, but again, it has to feel right as well, right? So money is not the only driver here. You always will also want to feel comfortable. So have a chat with both a mortgage advisor and with your bank or with a bank. Yep.
Okay. All right. Then I have a question from Moataz. Can I cancel my offer if the appraisal evaluated the property less than I can pay?
Yeah, good question, because you're only committed to the purchase when you've signed the purchase contract and that 3 cool-off days have ended. So, oh. Can you see everything?
I still see the screen, the Q&A, the slide.
Okay, I don't. Okay. So good question, because you're only committed to. Yes, here we go. You're only committed to, and I'm trying to scroll back to the timeline. Okay, so here you've submitted the offer, it gets accepted, that's great. Here you do the appraisal, and this is when your cool-off period ends. So this is when you're officially committed to the deal. Anytime before this, you can pull out at any given time without giving technically a reason. It's nice to give a reason, but that's why we always advise to do the appraisal before you sign a bridge contract, because it takes a few days, and maybe you get the final appraisal report on the first, second, or third day of the cool-off period, but that still allows you, if you get a lower appraisal, to pull out of the deal. I hope that answers the question.
I think so. All right, and we were just talking about our packages, the Smart and Complete package. The question goes as, either way, should we have a property in mind, or should we, as the buying consultant or the clients, come up with properties according to their requirements?
Yeah, good question as well. Let's go back to this one. So for the Smart package, we technically kick into gear when you've seen a property and you're keen to move forward on it, right? So we don't do searches, we don't book in viewings. We get ready when you actually have seen a property and you're like, I want to submit an offer on this one. That's why it's also so affordable, because it allows us to act when you actually have seen the property. Complete package, we still don't do the search because Fonda has all the properties that you need. We kick into gear when you've seen a property on Fonda, send it to us, we'll book in the viewing, we'll go with you during the viewing, and we'll take it from there with you. So that's how the packages work.
Okay, all right. Then I have a question from Siavash. He or she asks, would you say it's practically impossible to get a mortgage on a fixed term contract employment as opposed to a permanent contract?
Also a great question. No, it's definitely possible. So what the bank will require is a employer statement. That's a piece of paper from HR stating that if you do your job well, if things at the company go well, then we'll extend your contract. That's enough for you to get a mortgage with a fixed contract.
Okay. Then I'm going back to the anonymous attendee. Most houses are fully furnished when looking on Fonda. So the pictures, all the properties, of course, with furniture. Is it possible to find some houses that are actually fully furnished for sale as well? If you understand what I mean.
So it's not a filter option. So it's not like you can filter and say, okay, hey, this is fully furnished. Sometimes if somebody's renting out the property, then they'll put up some of the movables up for sale. What you can do is have a look at the properties that state that currently the owner is not living there, and that's been rented out. Sometimes it's in the listings, but it's not an easy way to filter those out of the property reserve. Sorry.
Yeah, it's something that Funda can take into account for the next update.
Yeah, it's a good tip. Yeah,
definitely. All right, then the question, next question is, what happens if you buy a house for 300K, but after 5 years or so, the value of the property goes down below the 300K? Is that something that the NHG can cover?
So if you got the NHG, for sure, but please note that the NHG comes into play indeed when you have to sell the property and it's below what you have outstanding as a mortgage, right? So 5 years is a term where you've probably paid off some of the property. Let's say you've paid off 25,000 euros, and then the property value sinks to 25,000 euros below what you've bought it for. Then because that evens out, the National Mortgage Guarantee is not going to give you that 25,000 euros. They're only going to give you money if you have an outstanding debt with the bank, because you have a value that's lower than the outstanding debt you have with the bank. So that's what they'll take into account.
Okay. All right. And well, regarding that subject, is there a difference between having indefinite contract intention letter and indefinite contract in bank interest rate?
No.
All right. Quick question, quick answer.
Yeah, that's it. Quick answer.
Would you say there is a benefit in having a partnership or cohabitation contract with my boyfriend when buying a house?
I think it's smart. Why? Because what happens to one of you, if something happens, you break up, or you guys, something happens to one of you, and technically inheritance law states that it would technically go to the first in line. And then the person left behind might end up with owning half of it. And then maybe their mother-in-law owns the other half. Well, if you have a lovely mother-in-law, that's fine. If it's not that great of a relationship, but do put that into a cohabitation, a contract, or a agreement. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Then I have a question from Emmy. I think we touched on this a little bit, but maybe it's good to just repeat it once. Is there a place where I can see how much houses were sold historically?
The land registry offers reports on how much houses were sold. Yeah.
The land registry. Okay.
Yeah, that's
Cool.
the kadaster in Dutch.
Yeah.
Maybe we can pop that into the chat. The word kadaster.
Yeah, sure. I'll do that. Then we have a question from Muhammad. Is there any difference if we have a permanent? Well, I think we touched on this as well. Permanent job contract or 1-year contract. And let's twist it a little bit. That we also asked the question of having a self-employment contract. Maybe that's
Okay.
smart as well.
Yeah, that's a nice twist. So there's no difference between a permanent contract versus a 1-year contract if you get that employer statement. But if you have a self-employment contract, then technically the bank will see you as a business, and they'll want to know if you can actually, well, keep your head above water and be able to pay off the mortgage, right? So they'll look at your history of earnings, and some banks will look at 2 years, some banks look at 3 years. So if you've just recently moved here, you started up your self-employment company 2 months ago, then most likely you'll not get a mortgage. Of course, if you can create a very strong story, you have a lot of money in savings and so on and so on, then they might, but generally they look at savings, or at least they look at history of earnings of at least 2 years.
Exactly. Okay. Then we have a question from Limburg Overleg. Is it possible to close your bank earlier? So I think pay off your total mortgage.
Yeah, so there's 2 ways to do that. One, you sell the property and you pay off your mortgage.
Yeah.
That's definitely possible. The bank will not charge you a fine. The other one is, let's say you get a big bonus and you want to pay off your mortgage faster. And some banks will allow that. Some banks will charge you, will allow you to pay off a certain amount per year, and some banks will not allow it to charge you a fine if you actually do. So it's good to look into that. And again, this is where you kind of want an advisor on board.
That's a good one, definitely. All right, and can you also tell us what the pros and cons are of buying a new build?
Yeah, I was waiting for that question.
Should be aware of.
Yeah, definitely. So the difference between buying a new build and something that's already been developed, first of all, and if it's a completely new build and you're buying it off the developer, you don't pay any transfer tax. So that's a pro. The second is that you can actually influence the finishing or the level of finishing to some extent. It depends on where in the process you buy that new build. If it's very late in the process, most likely a lot of the things have already been defined and cleared. But if you buy it very early in the process, there might be things that you can influence. Those are 2 of the biggest upsides of that. Of course, quality is good because level of finishing or the construction will be up to these days standards. So that's good. Most likely you'll get a energy label A, and it's very energy sufficient. So that's a good sign. The downsides, or the things that you want to have to look out for, is that sometimes, so the other day, we bought a property for a client and it came without a kitchen, but it was in the finer details. Like all the pictures showed beautiful kitchens and this and that. So make sure you know what you're actually buying, right? And this can go from a kitchen that is not in there to, for example, power sockets, which you'd have to pay for separately. So there's a lot of things that you need to clearly define and make sure you're aware of before you sign those papers. The other thing is that if you buy a property that's not constructed yet, you most likely will buy the ground first, and then you pay an installment for every layer that they finish. I'm not saying layers in terms of stories, but most likely the phases of the construction are stated in such a way that you pay when the foundation is in, you pay when the first layer and the construction is in, you pay when the interior has been finished, you pay when the exterior is finished. So every time you pay something, you will have a debt, right? Because you will still need to get that mortgage from the bank, but you can't live in it yet. So you'll have rental payments that you make on a monthly basis, and you'll have mortgage payments. So that's very good to look into. Have a calculation or do a calculation with your mortgage advisor, because they'll be able to tell you what impact it will have on your monthly fees. So I think those are the most important things. Yeah.
All right. Well, now we're there anyway. Can you also tell us a little bit about the pros and cons of buying an apartment versus a house with a garden, for example?
Yeah. So buying an apartment, you buy into most likely a owner association, and they're responsible for maintaining the public areas, the actual building itself, taking out insurance and stuff like that. Um, it also means you will have neighbors. If you live on the top floor, that's great because you won't have any upstairs neighbors. If you live on the bottom floor or somewhere in the middle, you have neighbors on all sides. So that is something to take into account as well. And compared to buying a house, like you have all the responsibility there, right? So all the maintenance, inside, outside, insurance, those are your responsibilities. Having a garden is lovely, right? But yeah, please bear in mind that if there's anything wrong with that property, then it's your responsibility. It's your cost, whether it's foundation or anything else. With the apartment, you will pay a monthly service amount into the VVE, and with that money, they will take care of everything. So if you're not really good at saving, then an apartment might be a good option for you. If you're good at saving or you can good at keeping some money aside, then buying a home is quite nice. Of
Or
course,
handy yourself, of course.
size, yeah. If you're handy, yeah, definitely. Of course, size matters, right? Because a home will most likely be a little more spacious um, versus an apartment, but it depends on what you're looking for. Yeah.
Exactly. Cool. All right. Then, well, we were talking about closing fees earlier. Should I have an actual certain amount to start the buying process?
Yes, you should. So let's go back to the again, this presentation will be shared with you guys, right? So you don't have to write anything down. These are the things that you need to take into account. So the transfer tax, if you, of course, have to pay it, if you're below 35 and you're paying for a property that's for a purchase price below 400K, you're exempt. Notary fees, bank fees, or mortgage broker fees, real estate agent fees if you use a real estate agent to buy, appraiser fees, technical inspection, so on and so on. Depending on what the value of your property is or the purchase price of the property, take into account if you have to pay everything here, you'll probably pay between 4 and 5%. If you don't pay the transfer tax, you'll still pay about 3 to, well, no, 2 to 3% of the purchase price. So that's what I would keep in savings. In the current market, I would save a little bit more money because, especially with the more popular properties, you have to probably overbid over the actual value. Please bear in mind, not the asking price, but the value. Yeah. All right, this sounds like a teacher there. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Then we have a next question regarding a mortgage. Is it bad to take out an interest only mortgage in order to have lower monthly repayments?
Yeah, we're seeing that happen more and more. How do I, what's the right metaphor? So I kind of call it the froth of the market, right? So, or the foam on the mouth of something that's crazy. I think that it's not necessarily a healthy thing because what you're technically doing, you're speculating. And like buying a house already is speculation to some extent, right? But if you don't pay off your property, then you're speculating even more because you're hoping that the value of the property will go up, right? So I know that the interest rates are much lower, but then you can just rent a property, right? Maybe it's cheaper to get interest only property, but if something were to happen to the market, then you're not very well protected in that sense. So I would advise you to pay off at least some part of the property. I know there's interest only, for example, on half of the property, but I think that it's important that you make a careful decision and also take into account what's going to happen in the longer run, especially considering the fact that you'll have starting costs as well. So in order to earn some of the money back you've invested, yeah, I think there's a risk involved. The more people that will do that, the more unstable the market will be.
All right, good one. Well, let's say we are paying off our mortgage every month.
Yep.
Is it possible to overpay our mortgage payments to pay them off quicker? And does this differ if you have an annuity or just the simple rates?
No, it differs per mortgage provider. Some will allow you to pay off everything in one go without a penalty. Some will allow you to pay small parts, and some will not allow you anything to pay off anything without a penalty. So have a look at that. And again, this also differs per mortgage type. So per mortgage provider, per mortgage type, and that's why, because it's well, if you break it down, it can be a relatively simple product because there's so many different variables that you want to take into account. I would advise you to have someone explain it to you. Again, do due diligence, chat with somebody that can explain it to you. Don't chat just one person, chat to multiple, a bank and a mortgage advisor.
Okay, all right. Well, then we're going to move on to our last question. It's a critical one. I hope you're ready. What difference would it make for me as a client in this case to buy a home on my own versus being helped by an agency or versus being helped by us? In other words, which are the steps that you can assist with? How much is left for me to do? And how do you do a better job than traditional real estate agencies?
Ooh, that's very critical. Is there a name there?
They're anonymous attendee.
He's always here. So anonymous attendee, that's a great question. So let's cut up into pieces. If you do it yourself, well, you have to do everything yourself, right? And the risk of doing it yourself is overpaying, buying a property that is not in a good condition, and getting advice from the wrong third party. So you might end up buying something that is not what you want it to be, and then if it turns out that it's much more expensive and you don't have protection in the right parts of the process, then you might end up in something that you don't want to end up in. Okay, then work with a traditional agent. I think that, of course, and they're not all the same, right? Like I think that there's a lot of great traditional agents out there, but I do know that currently the market is more of a seller's market. So if they work with you and you're the first client that they help, and then suddenly a seller comes by and says, "Hey, I also want to sell my property with you," then I know they'll be distracted, right? There's this really bad photo on the website where a girlfriend is walking with her boyfriend and the boyfriend is looking back at some other girl. That's that agent, and that other girl is a selling client, right? Because it's much easier to sell a property than it is to buy a property, and that's one. I also believe that a lot of the well, no, I won't call it a lot of it, but there is a certain stigma around a traditional realtor, and we have a very strong image of that here in the Netherlands. It's a guy on a scooter with like a striped suit with the very slick hair and everything, and what that reflects is that they're in for the money, right, and for making the deals. I sometimes get that feeling a little bit because they're less empathic, can relate less to your situation, and are more about closing the deal. I think, of course, closing is important because in the end, you want to have a house, but it doesn't prevail over anything, over everything, because in the end, you want to be happy in that house. So if we feel you're not going to be happy in that house, I'm going to tell you, right? Because I'll point out the things that could make you unhappy. I don't want you to come back after 6 months and tell me, shit, this is a crazy property that we bought. Why did you advise us, or why did you let us go ahead with it? So we'll be critical when it comes to your decisions as well. And that's where kind of like what I just showed, or what I just talked about from a traditional realtor point of view, this is what we are not. So we don't sell property. So all of our focus will go to the buying process. We've optimized that to such extent that we've become pretty good at it. We're also not in it to close the deal because we focus on customer satisfaction. That's our key driver, right? We get mainly really good scores, and if we get a bad score, then we want to find out why. What have we done wrong? How can we learn from that? Because the most important thing is make sure that you're happy, because when you're happy, well, first of all, you'll enjoy living in the property. If you enjoy living in the property, you will tell your friends, you will be happy with your life, and maybe at some point, if you want to buy a new property, or if a friend or a colleague asks you for a referral, you'll inform them. So we used to have like this secret slogan where we said, if we're not invited to your housewarming party, we didn't do a good job. What does that mean? A housewarming party means that you're happy with your home, you're celebrating it, and you want to show people, so it's not a shitty place. And the second thing is, if we get invited, that we've been able to actually build a relationship with you and made the experience a pleasant one. So luckily, at some point we said, no, we don't have to be invited, because at some point the invitations kept coming in, and it's very hard to say no to all of them. Maybe Corona helped a little bit with that, but yeah, so the difference is that we focus on buying only. We don't do it for the deal, we do it for the people. And of course, we're specialized in this because this is our main focus. So all the processes, the knowledge, and the information, the benefits are coming from that. So we've been able to become very efficient. And also, we talked about the set fees, right? The fees. So we don't charge commission or a percentage based on what you buy as a purchase price. Is there anything else? Well, we talked about it in the past. Like we're internationals as well, so we know what it's like to move to a new country and to find a new home. So we can relate. And I think that it's not just having a property that you get accepted, but it's also making sure that that process is pleasant along the way, because it can sometimes be an extensive process, right? Yeah, I hope that answered your question a little bit. It's a good question though. Maybe there's one more thing. What would I have to do myself in each and every one of them? Well, the first one, you need to do everything yourself. With a traditional agent, you might have to chase the agent to actually start working for you. The third part, where we come in play, if you go for the smart package, you go to the viewing yourself, and once you're actually in love with that property, will come into play. If you go for the complete package, then when you see something on Funda, drop it in our chat, and we'll pick it up from there.
All right. I think that was a perfect question to close it off for today. Those were all the questions.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Ludo, for managing the Q&A wonderfully as ever. Thanks a lot. Thanks everyone for being here. I hope this was useful. Again, maybe I can go to the previous slide. Feel free to book in a free intake if you have any further questions. You know where to find us. It's free of any charge, and we're happy to share more information. Again, what you'll receive in the follow-up emails, maybe tomorrow or the day afterwards, is a guide on how to buy a home in Rotterdam. There'll be a lot of information in there. If you want any specific information, like for example, the data on neighborhoods, drop us a note, send us an email. You can do that. I should actually also leave the email address here next time. We're learning every day, you see. So send us an email to buying@ehn.works. And we're ready for answering your questions. Have a lovely evening. Katie, I know you're in the webinar as well. Have a lovely evening. Guys, hope to see you soon and to help you find a home and fill it home. Thanks.